thank you, Jason, for that introduction, and thank you, Kent, for coming to the Arlington Heights Library. We are very excited that you're here to talk to us about this book. We've been talking about it for months. I would like to first talk to everybody, tell you kind of the sequence of events. Kent and I are going to have a conversation about the book here, and then after that there's going to be a question and answer session in which you are invited to ask any questions that you like. There'll be people with microphones roaming around for you. And after that concludes, there will be a book signing. Okay, so that's how we're going to work things. And right now we're going to talk a little bit about that wonderful book that we all read, Ordinary Grace. So Kent, as Jason mentioned, you have a very successful track record with your Cork O'Connor mystery series. Ordinary Grace, of course, is completely separate. So was it accidental that this book came now, or was it part of your literary development?
You assume we plan these things. These are graces that just come to us. You know, Ordinary Grace, I really believe, was a book that I was always meant to write. That's how it felt to me. If I had one wish for writers here or anywhere, it would simply be this. I hope at some point in your journey as a writer, you come across that story that speaks to you so profoundly and so deeply that you understand you were always meant to write it. Because when that happens, the blessings that are going to come to you, I can tell you, are going to be more than you can count. So I think I view the Cork O'Connor series as it's what got me started. It's what developed a following for me, and it was all the groundwork for learning how to tell a story that then I was able to bring to Ordinary Grace. So Ordinary Grace came, I think, when it was supposed to come, in a time when I understood how to tell a story, when I had the wisdom to understand all of the events that I wanted to put in that story and make them resonate.
Right, right. So how different has the reaction to this book been from critics and readers of your other books?
Oh, critics and readers have always loved my books.
Good answer.
You know, this was a risky book for me to write. Many years ago, my publisher invited me out to New York City and sat me down and said to me, "Kent, we only want Cork O'Connor novels coming from you." And they did that for this reason. The only other book I've ever written that was not a part of my series was a book called The Devil's Bed. Has anybody here ever read The Devil's Bed? 1, 2, 3. My agent's back there. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you. Yeah, these are the only people in the entire universe who did read The Devil's Bed. And people stayed away from it, not because it wasn't a good book. It got great reviews. They stayed away from it because it wasn't a Cork O'Connor novel. And readers were unwilling to follow me to a place that didn't have Cork O'Connor. And it was after that sales debacle that my publisher called me out there. So, so I was very concerned when this story idea came to me, and I knew I had to write it, that it would suffer the same fate. It might be a good story, but nobody would read it. So honestly, this is what I did based on my experience with The Devil's Bed. For 2 years before that book came out, I began telling audiences everywhere I went to speak. I would speak about whatever it was I was supposed to speak about, and then I would say, but wait, there's more. And I would tell them about this book that was not a Cork O'Connor novel, but that they ought to open their hearts to when it comes. But that said, I was still very concerned about how it would be received, and so its reception has been absolutely gratifying. Did I expect that people would like it? Yeah, kinda. I thought it was a good story. I thought it was a story that spoke to a lot of important things and in an interesting and compelling way. So I really believed that if people got over the fact that it wasn't a Cork O'Connor novel, they could embrace it, and that's exactly what's happened. In fact, my publisher got behind it in a way I had never anticipated.
Well, that helped with you talking to people about it before, and then your publisher.
Yeah, it's been a very a nice collaborative effort in that way.
And then I think, of course, the book just speaks for itself. So I think that's all it would take, is reading it to know that.
But yeah, but you got to get into readers' hands first.
You got to get it in there. Yes, yes, absolutely. You're right about that. It's interesting to understand the process of writing from an author's viewpoint. With this story, which is a blend of mystery and a coming-of-age story, what came first to you? Was it the plot? Was it a certain character that you built the story around, or a theme? What was first?
Well, this was what I wanted to do. I had been looking for a very long time for a story that would allow me to go back and revisit an important period in my own life, the summer I was 13 years old. I don't know what being 13 years old is like for the women in this group, but for men, for guys, it's a really important period in our lives. We're standing in a doorway, we're in a threshold, with one foot still firmly planted in our childhood and one foot poised to take us into our manhood, but we're not quite ready to go there yet. For a lot of reasons, I have always, across the course of my life, recalled vividly the summer I was 13 years old. And so I wanted to find a story that would allow me to go back and recall that summer and evoke it in such a way that I could actually put it on the page. And even readers who were born generations later would be able to read that story and know what it was like to be a 13-year-old boy in a small Midwestern town in the summer of 1961. So that was one motivation. And the other was I wanted to write a story that would allow me to explore more deeply the whole question of the spiritual journey and grace in our lives, which is an important issue for me. So I had that desire, and I had, generally speaking then, where I would want the book to be set in a small town, and who would tell the story, and how would the story be told. And then I thought about the Drum family. The Drum family kind of came to me. Really, the idea came to me to use my own family, and I could create a fictional family that would be my family. And so I knew the family, I knew the place, I knew the family, I knew the time. And then the question was, what happens in this story? What is it that drives this story? And because I write mysteries that involve murders, I thought, okay, somebody's going to die.
Well, that makes sense. It sounds like a lot of different things played into your thoughts about creating the story. And I know for those of us who grew up in the 50s and 60s, everything in this book rings true, down to what they're eating and you know, the relationship of the children to the parents. So what do you think are the universal truths about childhood that will compel readers of any age to read, to want to invest in this story?
You know, at the heart of this is friendship, really. The friendship particularly that exists between Frank and his brother, his younger brother, Jake. If I had to say what the foundation of that story was, it's that love that exists between those two brothers. But it goes beyond that, and it's the love of family, and it's the dynamic of family, and what holds families together, despite all the forces that seem to try to drive us apart. And it's friendship beyond that, the friendship of the boys that they have with the other kids in the town. And then beyond that, it's all of the issues that those of us who grew up in small towns, but really affect cities too, deal with. The realization that life is not as simple as we believe it to be, that there's a world out there that can be very menacing, that there are prejudices out there that are going to affect us and affect people that we care about. And how do we take all of this in and find a way to go on with our lives in a graceful way.
Right, right. Speaking of the family, the Drum family, I'm always interested when I read a book in the characters' names. And I wondered if you chose their names according to the meanings of their names, or if it was just coincidental. Because I actually looked up to see what the names meant.
Barb, get a life.
I'm an English major, what can I say? I know, but did you know that? Did you know that Nathan means to give, and Ruth means companion, although she was a reluctant companion at times, I think. Ariel means lion of God, and I thought that kind of fit her. She was fierce, and yet she was compassionate also at the same time. Frank means free man, And I thought he was kind of a free spirit, Frank. I think that's one of the things we all loved about him. And Jake means the supplanter. And I thought he was the supplanter. He's the person that came in at that moment, that wonderful moment in the book where somebody needed to say that ordinary grace. And I just thought that was, well, that was an amazing coincidence then.
For those of you who don't know, Barb is working on her master's degree in English. And so every written work is something to be dissected and understood. I'm sort of an organic artist. Things come to me and I try not to question where they came from.
That's great.
The names for all of the drum family name was the most difficult part. I had all of the first names right from the get-go, but I monkeyed around a lot with the family name until I finally stumbled on drum and really liked it for a lot of reasons. But the other names, that is so interesting.
Well, thanks. Okay. Well, I just thought that was kind of interesting. I loved some of the detail that you put into the book. One thing that particularly struck me was the fact that Emil Brandt's house had no pictures on the wall because, of course, he's blind. So do you think about these details as you're writing, or do you kind of add them in later?
I write in a linear way. I write from the beginning to the end, and so in every scene as I'm there, I'm there. I try to sink myself as deeply as I can into the imagining of that place and the action and all of that. So when I imagine the Brandt, the home of Emil Brandt, and Lisa, I imagine that isolated farmhouse, and how do these two live there, and what do they do with each other? How do they interact? What's the environment like? And so I realized, okay, Emil wouldn't need all of the accoutrements, all of the beauty that we see there. What's important to him is the music. And so his area in that house is all about the music that he creates, not the visual. And in a house where you have someone who's blind, you try to keep things as simple as possible so there's not stumbling and all of that. These are things that I read. Then I thought about Lisa, what's she like and what's important to her, and the kitchen was important to her. And so the kitchen is a very different place. And the outside, the lawn, the yard, the grounds, gardening is important to her, that beauty. That's where she finds the beauty in a life that in many other ways is not very beautiful. So I think about these things as I'm creating them, and they help then with the richness of everything else that moves out from that. So yeah, I try to imagine it as significantly as I can in the moment. But sure, you go back when you're doing revisions and you go, oh, wait a minute. If it was this kind of a place, wouldn't it also involve something like this? So you add those things. But the truth is, in Ordinary Grace and in fact in my Corcoran novels, I'm a fairly slow writer, and I'm a fairly careful writer. And so by the time I finished that first draft, I wanted in as many respects as possible to be as close to the finished piece as it's going to be. And then I give it to my agents to read, and I realize when I get their comments back, what a terrible story it really is. That's not true. I'm being facetious. For those of you who want to be writers or maybe are writers, I can't tell you enough the importance of having really terrific people involved in what you do to give you a second editorial eye, to give you the advice and guidance that's so necessary, to give you the support, to give you the encouragement. And I got to tell you, my agent Danielle Egan-Miller and Joanna McKenzie and all the folks at Brown and Miller do that. So this is from me, folks. You don't have to participate. Thank you, Danielle. So yeah,
okay.
I'm there. I try to be there as much in the moment as I can be while I'm actually writing it.
Right, right. And the detail is, a lot of the detail in your book is, we were all very taken with that. It was just beautiful the way you wrote it, especially your description of the town and the surrounding landscape in Minnesota. Besides the obvious physical attributes of beautiful Minnesota, what else makes Minnesota the ideal location for this story?
I needed a location that was Midwest, because when I was 13 years old, I lived in a small Midwestern town. In my case, it was in Ohio. I wanted a place that was agrarian in nature. For those of you who don't know my Cork O'Connor series, I set that in the North Woods of Minnesota, which is a very beautiful place, but it's of a particular kind of beauty. Southern Minnesota, the Midwest, has another kind of beauty, and one that in truth speaks more especially to my heart than the Great North Woods of Minnesota. And I can't give you a specific, because like so much of what we respond to emotionally, we respond to it for reasons that we're not even sure we can understand. For me, it was because my formative years were Midwest years, because I lived in a small town and on a farm in that period of time. Because as I was becoming aware of the world, this was the world I became aware of. And then I graduated out to the broader world, but this was the world where I began to learn the truths that would stand me in good stead for the rest of my life. So Southern Minnesota filled the bill for me, and just right down the line. It was so easy to take the small town I grew up in and transplant it to Minnesota. And there's an actual town in Minnesota that New Bremen is based on. For those of you who know Southern Minnesota, it's based on New Ulm, which is a beautiful town sitting on the Minnesota River. So I took what I knew about small towns, I took the foundation for New Ulm, and then I began adding bits and pieces from other towns along the Minnesota River, and from the town I grew up in, the experiences I had there, the barber shop I had my hair cut when I was a kid is in this book. So those kinds of things, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think for us being in the Midwest, I mean, I think my heart, could feel the Midwest influence, could feel the people, and that helped us to know the people in this story, I think, also.
I think too, though, that it's a story that speaks beyond the Midwest. I think it speaks to, not just to everybody who grew up in a small town. How many of us grew up in small towns? Lots of us grew up in small towns. Exactly. But I think what I hoped was I was creating a story that even if you didn't grow up in a small town, even if that wasn't your experience, I could evoke this place in so significant a way, so sensual a way, so visceral a way, that you would know that town.
Right. And I think we could feel it, definitely. Minnesota is, I think it's predominantly Lutheran, I think.
Yeah. In the book I said they're as ubiquitous as ragweed, I think.
Yeah. But you made Nathan a Methodist minister. Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, I'm a Methodist.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right. Go with what you know.
Go with what you know. I have.
Go with what you know.
I tapped a couple of retired ministers in the Methodist Church that I know, who served congregations in small towns, rural settings in Minnesota for their experiences, so that I could really write, knowing knowledgeably about that experience. But yeah, I'm a Methodist, so it's much easier to create them than Lutheran or anything else.
Okay, I was just curious.
I have no idea what the hell Lutherans are all about,
There's quite a few of them there, but yeah.
I do know the Methodist secret handshake. I don't know the Lutheran secret handshake.
We won't ask you to divulge that here. Most people I spoke with about the book, they were surprised that Ariel was the character who was murdered. And it was an extremely tortured path to the truth, with many suspects, of course. And we find out that Lise Brandt was responsible eventually. Did you know?
Thanks for letting that cat out of the bag.
Oh, I hope well, I'm presuming everybody knew that.
We're hoping you all read it.
Yeah, sorry. Did you know that she was going to be responsible?
Yes, I knew all along.
You did know that all along. And I was wondering, are we supposed to absolve her or feel sorry for her because of her disability? Are we supposed to excuse her for that?
No, not because of her disability.
Because of something else?
Because we're all human and we're all broken. And we all do things that that are horrible things.
Right.
Sometimes, sometimes we kill. Sometimes we maim. Sometimes we just hurt to the quick people. And so there are degrees of all of that, but it's all brokenness. And you shouldn't forgive her because of her situation. You should forgive her because she's human. Because she made a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because that's what we're all about. We're all about forgiving each other.
Right, right. And I'm glad you said that, because I think as I read it, I felt for her. I mean, I felt, you know, compassion for her, and I wondered, I thought, well, should I not be angry because she committed this act? And then, but I did feel something, and I wasn't sure where it came from. So that's good. That's interesting. Thanks.
I also, although I never really went into it, in my own imagining of what took place, it was an act that was not premeditated.
Right.
It was simply born out of her frustration and her desperation to hold on to what she had.
Right.
So you can certainly understand that as a motivation.
Yeah,
if in fact that's what happened.
Yeah. Many of the readers also were really disgusted with Emil Brandt after they found out that he had in fact impregnated Ariel. And here again I'm asking, you know, should we feel sorry for him, or, you know, or did you expect us to kind of be repulsed by him, kind of, you know, loathe him as some people do? And what did you feel about his character?
He's a man in great conflict. He's a man wounded in many, many ways. And he's a man who doesn't really know his way. And he's trying to find his way. And part of what he left behind that he would like to hold on to is his love for Ruth Drum, which he can't have.
Right.
But there is her daughter there who's very much like her. And so I thought of him as in his weakness reaching for that which he could have, and then realizing this is not right. I will not do this again. But of course Ariel, who's so young and so vulnerable and looks at him in such a magnificent way, is overwhelmed by this, what she experiences with this guy. And so she's, you know, at 18 years of age, thinking of changing her whole life and making her life all about him. And he's so far beyond that. He's so far in another place. So no, I don't think you should be repulsed by him. You shouldn't feel sorry for him. Once again, he just screwed up the way we all screw up. And his were just had significantly dire circumstances. Now I'm not saying, you know, I advocate having there be no ramifications or no responsibilities or anything.
Right.
But when people screw up, you try to understand why they screw up.
Right. Sometimes it takes a while too, I think. I think some of the readers, the initial thing was to be angry at him, and then I think as they read on and they realized, you know, how much, you know, it cost him also, I think maybe that helped.
Thank you.
Soften. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, because there was a price he paid.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. But, of course, among the readers, certainly in this library, there was great affection for Frank, who's a
as well there should be.
Spunky little kid there. And, you know, we love the way he loves his family and how loyal he is. So what I want to know is, how much of Frank is William Kent Krueger?
You know, Frank is a little bit of me, but he's also a lot of my older brother.
Oh.
Okay, so here's the deal, folks. The Drum family is my family. My father wasn't a minister in a small town, but he was a high school English teacher in a small town. And teachers, ministers, bankers, these are people who are more closely scrutinized in a small community than many other people. So I understood that part of the experience. Ruth Drum, Frank's mom, Nathan's wife, is a woman not very happy being a minister's wife. This was not what she signed on for. When she married Nathan, she thought she was marrying a guy who was going to come back and be a hotshot lawyer, which is what she wanted. Mm-hmm. And he comes back a very changed man, and he becomes a minister, and that's not what she signed on for. So she's not really very happy fulfilling the role as minister's wife. She's really really not very good at it in the end. And that was my mom. My mom graduated from college with a dual major in music and in drama. And oh, she was a drama queen. She wanted to go out and be an artist. And what she had to do was raise 4 children, because that's what women then did. Mm-hmm. They became homemakers. They were the homemakers. My mother was a terrible homemaker. I loved her dearly, but she was horrible in the home. She was a legendarily bad cook. And so Ruth Drum is my mother. Ariel and Frank and Jake all reflect the relationship that I had with my siblings growing up. But I was actually the youngest of 3 boys. Oh. So when I created Frank, I created an amalgam of my own perceptions wedded with the way my brother behaved toward me, which was very close, very loving. He was my best friend growing up, the next brother up. So Frank is sort of an amalgam of him, and Jake is sort of me and every younger brother. Mm-hmm.
Well, he was a very sweet young man. And let me just say about Frank, I just am saying this. Now, I know in the book we see them 40 years later, but Frank was quite the amateur sleuth, you know, slinking around town, eavesdropping on everybody, you know, showing up everywhere to check everything out.
I thought about naming him Nancy Drew.
That's what I'm saying. You could have made a whole series on him.
Yeah.
He was quite good.
Do you know, when you write a book like this, and particularly from a first person's point of view, and particularly when you're talking about a childhood, how as children do we get the information that adults won't share with us? So I lived in a farmhouse, and that farmhouse had those heating grates. And so the heat started down here, and the only way you got heat upstairs was through those heating grates. Oh my God, could you listen to? Did I just lose? I'm lost.
Yeah, something happened.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Anything? So while he's working on it, can you hear this? Okay. So when I was a kid, let me know just before you click it back on, because I don't want to blow out any eardrums here. Is it? Am I back on? Thanks. Okay. So that's how we got stuff, you know. Or, you know, after you went up to bed at night, all those television shows you wanted to watch that you couldn't watch, what did you do? You crept down the stairs to the landing and you peeked around. And so you learn things as a child by being very sly, you know? And so that's how Frank gets his information. He's very sly. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you write a story and you have to have information come to him, you gotta get it to that kid somehow. So you create things like furnaces that are under repair and have air ducts that serendipitously, you know, carry conversations down to you. Or you happen to be near a window or whatever. So Frank is always moving around trying to get the information that adults won't share with children.
We like that about him, definitely. And there are a lot of moments he overhears, of course, between Gus and Nathan over their shared experiences in World War II. And I know a lot of the readers, you know, wondered exactly what happened between them during the war and what was the nature of their pain. In my experience, talking to people from World War II, talking to veterans, they don't discuss the war in negative terms. And I think it's because of their patriotism or their loyalty to service. Do you think that's why in this story, Gus and Nathan don't reveal to us exactly what their secrets were, what caused them such pain?
I wondered what happened to Gus and Nathan. I knew they came back changed, and I knew there was something really terrible that they'd been a part of that changed them. And so across the course of the story, I was trying to come up with what is this thing that had such a profound, that wounded them so terribly. And then I thought, now wait a minute. My father was a veteran of World War II. He came back with shrapnel in his body, and he would never talk about that experience. So I still have no idea of exactly how that happened, except that I know from some of his veiled remarks that it involved the death of his best friend. But he never talked about it.
Yeah.
And most of my friends' fathers who came back from the war, were veterans, also would not talk about their experiences.
Right.
And so I thought, that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality. Our fathers were wounded, and we'll never know why. We'll never know how exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the way I left it, because that was my experience.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's what I thought. Interesting, isn't it? In a lot of literature, people receive grace after they have done something terrible. And since grace is something that is given unconditionally, does it follow that they are redeemed after they're given grace? And when I'm talking about redemption here, I'm talking about it in a very broad sense, nothing specific, because we all come from a different background here, religiously or not. And so I wonder, are Nathan and Gus redeemed for their war crimes? Do they receive grace, and are they redeemed?
Oh, you are an English major, aren't you? We offer grace. I think we offer the possibility of redemption, but that's something that's really personal. I think we are redeemed. I think we're all broken. We are all broken people. Every one of us. And I think we are all, as Annie Lamott says, we are all pre-approved. Our brokenness doesn't matter if you believe in a divinity that runs through us all. Our brokenness doesn't matter. And so we are redeemed. But whether we embrace that is the question. I mean, we are redeemed, but do we embrace that? Do we really allow ourselves to believe that we're redeemed? And that's one of the things that I wanted to get at in Ordinary Grace. I wanted to get at the idea that we offer these blessings to one another every day. And that's exactly what they are. They're blessings. And sometimes we open our arms to them. There are those people who just do that. They open their arms, and there are others who just don't know how to accept that.
Right.
And my hope always is that at some point in our lives, we recognize our mutual brokenness. We offer one another forgiveness. And that's the way it should be. But that's not the way it really is.
Right. I like that, the way you put it, that we have an offer of redemption, because people maybe don't always take it, but maybe they do. And certainly in the story, there are some wonderful moments of grace between the characters. I'm specifically thinking about Frank when he lets Warren Redstone go, and Nathan's obvious compassion toward Travis Clement, and Jake's devotion to Lisa Brandt, and Gus's devotion to the Drum family seems, because he kind of saves them. He's there at critical moments when they need him. So it seems in this story that it's not only God giving the grace, but it's people giving grace to one another. No?
It's God giving the grace through us.
Okay.
We're simply the vehicle. We're the channel. We're the vessel through which it flows. That's our opportunity to be a part of the divine.
Oh, very nice. Interesting, thank you. Now I'm going to talk about something funny here. So there were some great moments of humor in this story. One that particularly amused me was when Frank pushed Morris Engdahl into the quarry.
God, I love that scene.
That was a great great scene. We were rooting for him. Edna Sweeney and her underwear hanging on the line. Those of us from that generation remember the underwear hanging on the line. We certainly do. And then, of course, Edna and Avis in Nathan's office discussing their marital difficulties. And I personally chuckled through that scene where Ruth was in the hospital waiting room talking to Julia Brandt. Oh, that little sarcastic exchange between them. Did that have you laughing too? That was pretty funny. Just beautifully written. So were you intentionally trying to balance the tragedy with some humor? Because there is a lot of tragedy in the book, of course. So
yeah, who would read a book that's all tragic?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, that's all the Greek stuff, right?
We're forced to read those.
Yeah, you know, when you're talking about boys, when you're talking about kids, there's so much humor that's involved. Thank God there's so much humor that's involved in that. And yeah, it helps to balance the story. Because there is so much that's dark about the story. Mm-hmm. You got to have those moments when people laugh. And you know, to get them, what you want to do is you want to have readers love your characters. And it's so much easier to love somebody, to love a kid who's looking through the fence at a, you know, a bra with D cups in. It's just, you know, that's so kid, so human, so boy. How can you not love him? You know?
Yeah. They were pretty funny, that's for sure. One thing I want to make sure I ask, because a lot of readers had asked me to ask you about this, about the title. So we know, of course, the ordinary grace that Jake offers in that wonderful, you know, poignant moment at the funeral luncheon. But what else does the title Ordinary Grace reference for you?
I think I've kind of already said it. They're the ordinary blessings that every day we offer one another through our kindnesses, through our forgiveness. And you know, we don't think of those as divine things, and that's too bad, because they really are. I mean, that's God in our lives every day. Do you know when I first began working with the manuscript, the working title was Awful Grace.
That was the other thing they wanted me to ask you. So what does the awful grace of God mean? Okay,
so for those of you who don't remember, the quote from Aeschylus is very important. It goes like this: he who learns must suffer, and even in our sleep, pain, which cannot forget, falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. And as Nathan talks with Frank at the end, toward the end of the book, about what's meant by that, it's not awful in a negative way. Right. It's awful in that it's so magnificent. We simply can't comprehend it, and we stand in awe of it, this grace that surrounds us and fills us and is offered to us in every moment. So that's the awful grace. Mm-hmm. Of God, and it's around us, and it's so huge and magnificent. And the ordinary grace is you and me.
So it's really a beautiful thing then.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Definitely, I like that. I also want to talk about, I know Cork O'Connor from your mystery series is part Ojibwe. Mm-hmm. I think I said that right, I hope. Warren Redstone's a member of the Dakota tribe, and quite an enigmatic character. He was the Yoda to me in the story. He had a lot of
Yoda.
Yeah, he was. He had a lot of wise things to say in short sentences. So was he? Where did your interest in this culture, this Native American culture, come from?
Well, I was kicked out of Stanford University. Before I was kicked out, I was a cultural anthropology major. Oh. So the idea of other cultures has always fascinated me. And I live in Minnesota, and Minnesota is an area where lots of Native people live. So we have the Ojibwe, and we have the Dakota and the Lakota. We have little pockets of Fox and the Sauk, and just south of us are the Meskwaki and the Potawatomi and, you know, the Winnebago. So it's all around us. So it's a culture within the larger culture. Right. And to a lot of people, it's a culture that they know really very little about. And so I wanted that because of the history of southern Minnesota and the Dakota conflict.
Right.
Because it's still a wound that has not yet healed, and that prejudice still exists down there and affects people. I wanted that to be a part of the story.
So we can look at Warren Redstone as a kind of a representation of the Native American culture.
Okay.
Can we? Can we? That's what I'm asking. I don't want to take that for granted.
Yes, but he's not the only Native American in there. There is the family.
Right, right.
And they are tremendously affected by what happened, the community's reaction to the death of Ariel. And as Nathan points out, it's not so much the death of Ariel as an opportunity to let deep-seated prejudices now come out.
Thank you. A couple more questions I hear. We're going to be running out of time soon. So one thing I want to ask you is, what authors inspire you? And were there any in particular that inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, Ordinary Grace, you know, I wanted to write it, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to write it, and I made some attempts at it, and it just didn't feel right. And then I read Cormac McCarthy's novel Crossing, part of his Border trilogy, and I was just so blown away with, stylistically, what he had done in that book. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to create a story that doesn't have the usual shorthand that allows readers to skim pages.
Right.
I wanted to. So if you take a look at Ordinary Grace, you're going to. For those of you who rely on commas a lot, you're going to be disappointed because there's a dearth of commas in Ordinary Grace. Because I wanted the flow to be like a reverie. Oh. I wanted the flow to be like a remembrance. And we don't remember things in perfect sentences. And even the book that you read is not the manuscript I delivered to my publisher. The manuscript I delivered to my publisher, in addition to having few commas and less punctuation than you're used to, had no quotation marks. Because we don't remember things in perfect dialogue. Mm-hmm. Our exchanges we sort of remember. He said something like this, or you know, we talked about this. And so I wanted it to have that feel of reverie to it, that languid, dreamlike quality. And that was the only time I ever went round and round with my publisher about anything substantive in my work. They wanted quotation marks, I did not. Wow. But in the end, I was convinced that the lack of quotation marks was a barrier for readers, that some people might not read it because of that. And because I wanted people to read the story, I said, okay, let's put them in there. It's just fine. It's just fine. Right. But, so where do we begin with that question?
I don't know. I'm past that one. I'm on to the next one here, because we need to talk about this before we let you go here today. So my last question to you is about This Tender Land. I don't know if you're all aware, but Kent is writing a companion novel to Ordinary Grace, and it's tentatively titled?
It's absolutely going to be
absolutely titled This Tender Land.
This Tender Land.
Okay, and it's a companion novel that you're working on right now. It's set in southern Minnesota in 1958, but it is not about the Drum family. And I read that it is an exploration of the wounds of war, so you're going to go into the theme of the World War II veterans much more deeply. So what I'm going to ask you here, your 200 best new friends here would like to know some secret about that you haven't shared with anyone else.
My family's not in it.
They may be relieved.
Very quickly, here's a story. I just scratched the surface in Ordinary Grace of the whole question of the wounding of our fathers in those horrible, horrible conflicts. And I always knew I wanted to go more deeply into that. My roommate in college, when I was at Stanford, his father had served on the USS Indianapolis. Now, for those of you who don't know the story of the Indianapolis, here it is. Toward the end of World War II, the Indianapolis, I think it was a cruiser, was tasked with the mission of carrying a third atomic weapon to an island off the coast of Japan to be poised there should we want to drop yet another atomic bomb. So it was such a sensitive mission, they were ordered to travel under radio silence. So they fulfilled their mission, they delivered the atomic weapon, they turned around and they headed back, and shortly thereafter they were torpedoed and they sank very quickly. Because it was radio silence, they didn't get the word out that this had happened. So for days and days and days, nobody knew this had occurred. There were 1,200 men on that ship when it went down. 900 made it into the water alive. And then the sharks began to attack.
Oh, my.
And over the course of the next 5 or 6 days before they were finally spotted by accident and the rescue effort began, through the shark attacks, through dehydration, through exposure, 600 of those men who went into the water died. Only 300 were rescued, and my roommate's father was among them, and he said this was in 1969, so we're talking 25 years later. He said, my father still wakes screaming from nightmares about that experience. And so what I realized is that wounds like this do not heal. Men come back and they try to involve themselves in the lives of their families, in the lives of a community, in a way that seems normal, but there are still these deep wounds. And so I wanted to explore that, these boys, and they were boys who went away to war and they came back changed men. So this Tenderland deals a lot with that. I go more deeply into the Dakota conflict, another kind of wounding that's still unhealed. I talk about the battle, the war that women fight in various ways. And so it's not a bleak novel. There's a lot of humor in it.
Right.
But it's a novel that allows me to explore deeply issues that continue to be important to me.